They don't write songs about the kind of evil that hides behind money and power. Not out here. Not under this sun. Out here, it's silent quiet like a coffin. And when something bad happens, it doesn't scream. It just arrives uninvited and waits for someone fool enough to open the door. That night, Griffin Porter opened many doors. The windowless room deep within Porter's mansion lay still in near darkness, illuminated only by a single oil lamp casting long shadows across stone walls. A young woman sat bound to a wooden chair, her head slumped forward, dark hair obscuring her face. Her once fine dress now hung in tatters, revealing bruised skin beneath. Porter stood before her, his judicial robes discarded for a simple black vest over a crisp white shirt. His silver pocket watch glinted as he checked the time with practiced nonchalance. "Last chance, Mrs. Morgan." His voice carried no urgency, no anger, just cold certainty. "Where is the rest of the map? Where is your daughter hiding it?" Rebecca Morgan raised her head slowly, revealing a face once beautiful now marred by a split lip and swollen eye. Still her gaze held defiance. "I've told you, there is no map." Porter sighed as if disappointed by a child's poor performance. He nodded to a man standing in the shadows. "Mark her." The burly man stepped forward, holding an iron rod with a glowing end. The smell of heated metal filled the room as Rebecca's eyes widened. She struggled against her restraints as the man moved behind her, tearing the back of her dress open with one rough motion. "The judge paid good money for you," the man growled. "Now you belong to him, and to anyone he decides to sell you to." The rod descended. Rebecca's scream echoed through the mansion's stone foundation, but the thick walls ensured no one in Tombstone would hear. Porter watched dispassionately, then leaned close to her ear. "When you are ready to tell me about the map and your daughter, you can be returned. Until then, you'll be delivered to your new owner. Perhaps he'll have better luck making you talk." As consciousness faded, Rebecca's last thought was of her daughter's face and of the man she'd heard about, a former scout who lived alone in the desert. A man who might be her only hope. Dawn broke harsh and sudden over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in violent strokes of orange and crimson. Miles Sullivan stood on the weathered porch of his ranch house, watching the sun climb over distant mountains. The cup of black coffee in his hand had gone cold, forgotten as he lost himself in the empty landscape. Tombstone lay 5 miles to the east, but it might as well have been another world. Out here, it was just Miles, his horses, and the ghost that followed him from the war. He was 45 now, though the lines etched into his face and the silver threading his dark hair suggested older. Tall and lean, he moved with the careful precision of a man who had learned that quick movements could get you killed. The desert had taught him patience. The war had taught him everything else. His eyes pale blue and sharp as a hawk's caught movement along the fence line. A wagon, small and battered, sat near his eastern boundary. No driver visible. Just a mule tied to the post, looking as resigned to its fate as any creature Miles had ever seen. Something twisted in his gut, that old instinct that had kept him alive through years of scouting behind enemy lines. Something wasn't right. He set the coffee cup down and retrieved his Winchester rifle from inside the door. The weight of it felt familiar in his hands as he made his way down the porch steps, boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. The morning heat already pressed down as he approached the wagon, rifle ready but not raised. 20 yards out, he stopped, studying the scene. No tracks leading away from the wagon. Just the mule, the wagon, and something in the back covered by canvas. Miles circled carefully, scanning the horizon for any sign of watchers. Finding none, he approached the wagon from the side, catching the smell before he reached it. Blood, sweat, and something worse. Human misery had a scent all its own, one he remembered well from battlefield hospitals. A note had been tucked into the rope securing the canvas, debt paid in full. Miles pulled back the covering, the rough material scraping against his calloused fingers. Beneath lay a woman curled on her side, wrists bound with rope. Her dress was torn, exposing a back crossed with wounds both fresh and healing. And there, burned into her skin, between her shoulder blades, a single word: sin. For a moment, Miles stood frozen, a flood of memories threatening to drown him. Villages burning, women screaming, orders he'd followed because a uniform meant leaving your conscience at the door. The woman stirred, eyelids fluttering. She looked at him through a haze of pain, her cracked lips parting. "You paid for me," she whispered, her voice like sandpaper. "Now finish it." Miles didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He simply stood there, staring as the sun climbed higher and the desert grew hotter around them. Because the truth is, some men fight wars and think they've seen hell. But hell isn't a battlefield. Hell is a human being dropped off at your door, carved up and left to rot, while somebody out there thinks they've done you a favor. Miles carried the woman into his house, ignoring the blood that seeped into his shirt. He laid her gently on the bed in his spare room, a space that hadn't seen a visitor in years. The sheets were clean, but smelled of dust and disuse. He worked methodically, cutting away the ropes at her wrists, cleaning her wounds with whiskey and water. She drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally whimpering, but never fully waking. Her skin burned with fever. As he tended to her back, he studied the brand more closely. Sin. A simple word for such a deliberate cruelty. The burn was fresh, maybe a day old, the skin around it angry and inflamed. In the war, he'd seen men branded as deserters, During his time as a government operative afterward, he'd seen worse done to men and women alike. But there was something personal about this something that spoke of hatred beyond mere punishment. Miles had no illusions about healing. He could clean wounds, stitch cuts, set bones, skills learned on battlefields and in wilderness camps. But healing the kind of wounds this woman carried would take more than whiskey and bandages. Still, he worked through the morning and into the afternoon, applying salve to her back, wrapping clean strips of cloth around her torso, coaxing water between her lips, when she seemed aware enough to swallow. By sunset, he had done all he could. The woman slept, her breathing shallow but steady. Miles sat in a chair by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the road that led to his ranch. Someone had brought her here specifically. Debt paid in full, the note had said. But Miles owed no debts he knew of, and certainly none that would be paid with a half-dead woman. As darkness fell, he lit a single lamp, keeping it low. Years of scouting had taught him the value of darkness, how it could conceal and protect. The lamp cast just enough light for him to see the woman's face. In repose, with the dirt and blood washed away, he could see she had once been beautiful. Still was perhaps beneath the bruising and exhaustion. Miles didn't know her story, but he knew enough of the world to guess at parts of it. Tombstone might put on airs of civilization these days, 3 years after the famous gunfight at the OK Corral had supposedly tamed the town, but underneath the veneer of law and order, the same predators still hunted. Only now they wore suits and carried ledgers instead of six-shooters. The woman stirred, murmuring something unintelligible. Her eyes opened briefly, unfocused, searching the room. "Sarah," she whispered, "my little girl." Then she was gone again, pulled back into unconsciousness. Miles remained in the chair all night, watching, waiting. Dawn found him still there, eyes red-rimmed, but alert. He rose stiffly, muscles protesting the night in the hard chair. Outside, he checked his horses, fed the mule that had pulled the wagon, then climbed the small rise behind his house. From there, he could see for miles in every direction. And there, just at the edge of his vision, he spotted it, a glint of light reflecting off glass. Someone watching through a spyglass or binoculars. The figure was too distant to make out clearly, but Miles had no doubt they were watching his ranch. The game, whatever it was, had begun, and Miles had been pulled into it without his consent. But if there was one thing Miles Sullivan knew how to do, it was survive games where other people made the rules. For 3 days, the woman drifted in and out of consciousness. Miles changed her bandages, spooned broth into her mouth when she could swallow, and kept watch. The distant observer appeared each morning, watching for an hour before disappearing. Miles considered riding out to confront them, but couldn't leave his patient unattended. On the 4th morning, Miles returned from feeding the horses to find the woman sitting up in bed, eyes clear for the first time. She flinched when he entered, pressing herself against the headboard. "You're safe," he said, keeping his distance, his voice rusty from disuse. "No one's going to hurt you here." She studied him, eyes moving from his weathered face to his calloused hands, then to the rifle he'd propped by the door. "Where am I?" Her voice was stronger now, though still ragged. "My ranch, 5 miles west of Tombstone." Miles pulled the chair farther from the bed, before sitting, giving her space. "You were left in a wagon at my fence line 4 days ago." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by a flash of something, calculation perhaps. "You didn't send for me?" Miles shook his head. "No. Note said debt paid in full, but I don't know what debt." She looked down at her hands now, free of rope, but still marked with angry red welts. "My name is Rebecca Morgan. I used to be a school teacher in Tombstone." She raised her eyes to his. "And you're Miles Sullivan, former Army scout, served under General Sherman." Miles stiffened. "How do you know that?" "Everyone in Tombstone knows about the reclusive ex-soldier who trains horses and never comes to town." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "But I know more because my husband, my late husband, was a newspaperman. He collected stories." "And what's your story, Mrs. Morgan?" Miles kept his voice neutral, though suspicion had flared inside him. This was no random delivery. Rebecca's eyes darted to the window, then back to Miles. "I was arrested 2 months ago. The charge was false, interfering with a county official. My husband had been investigating Judge Porter for corruption. After Thomas, my husband, was killed, I continued asking questions." Her voice faltered. "They took my daughter, Sarah. She's 7. I don't know where she is now." Miles remained silent, waiting. "Judge Porter said I was to be made an example of. He sold me, like property." Her hand unconsciously moved to her back, where the brand lay hidden beneath bandages. "But I arranged it. I made sure I was sold to you." "Why me?" "Because you were a scout. Because you know how to fight. Because you've killed men before." Her eyes hardened. "And because I need someone who can help me find my daughter and stop Porter before he destroys more lives." Miles stood, abruptly moving to the window. "You've made a mistake. I'm not that man anymore. I don't fight other people's battles. This became your battle the moment they left me at your door," Rebecca said quietly. "Porter knows I'm here. He'll come for me and for you. You're involved whether you want to be or not." Miles turned back to her, his expression grim. "Then I'll deal with Porter if he comes here. But I'm not going to Tombstone looking for trouble." Rebecca watched him for a long moment, then reached for the cup of water by the bed. As she did, her sleeve pulled back, revealing a small paper tucked into the lining of her dress. It slipped out, falling onto the blanket. Miles saw it before she could hide it, a child's drawing of a woman and a girl holding hands with the words, "I love you, Mama," written in uneven letters. Rebecca quickly tucked the drawing away, but not before Miles had seen the naked pain in her eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in his own reflection for years after the war, after losing his family while he was away fighting other men's battles. "Rest," he said more gently. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." As he left the room, Miles knew he was already being pulled into something he'd spent years trying to avoid. The world he'd left behind had found him again, bringing all its violence and cruelty to his doorstep. But this time it had brought something else too, a woman with the same haunted eyes he saw in the mirror, and a child lost in the crossfire. Miles had failed to save his own family. Perhaps this was his chance to atone. As Rebecca regained her strength over the next few days, Miles kept his distance, providing food and fresh bandages, but avoiding conversation. He spent his days tending the horses, watching the horizon for observers, who continued to appear each morning, and thinking. At night, he sat on the porch, a bottle of whiskey, his only company. The desert stretched before him, vast and indifferent stars scattered like spilled salt across the black sky. In the stillness, memories crept in, memories he had spent years trying to outrun. Villages burning along Sherman's march to the sea, the screams, the silent aftermath. Then later after the war, the government work tracking down deserters, Confederate officials, and hiding arms dealers. The blood on his hands had never quite washed off. On the sixth evening, Rebecca joined him on the porch. She moved carefully, her wound still painful but healing. Without asking, she sat in the second chair, the one that had remained empty for years. They sat in silence for a long while, watching darkness claim the desert. "Why did you come out here?" she finally asked. "After the war, after everything, why choose this place?" Miles took a sip of whiskey, considering whether to answer. The question seemed innocent enough, but he sensed deeper currents. "Wanted emptiness," he said finally. "Spent too long around people. Needed space to hear myself think." "And what did you hear?" Miles glanced at her, surprised by the question. Most people didn't probe this way. "Nothing good," he admitted. "That's why I stay out here. Keep the devils contained." Rebecca nodded as if his answer confirmed something for her. "My husband was like that at first," she said softly. "He covered the war as a journalist, saw terrible things, came back changed." She looked down at her hands. "But he found his way back, through words, through seeking truth." "Truth is overrated," Miles said. "Mostly just hurts people." "Lies hurt more in the end." They fell silent again. An owl called from somewhere nearby, its cry lonely in the darkness. "There's a rider watching your ranch," Rebecca said suddenly. "Every morning, on the eastern ridge." Miles nodded. "I've seen him. It's one of Porter's men. They're making sure I'm here." She turned to face him. "They'll come eventually, when they think I'm well enough to talk." "What do they think you know?" Rebecca hesitated, weighing her words carefully. "Porter isn't just corrupt. He's looking for something, a treasure from the Civil War. Union gold that was hidden when they retreated from Confederate forces in this territory." Her voice dropped lower. "My husband found part of a map. I hid it with Sarah before they took me, in her doll. Porter wants it." Miles studied her face in the dim light. "Is that the real reason you arranged to be sent here? You think I can help you find this treasure?" "No," Rebecca said firmly. "I want my daughter back. Nothing else matters. But Porter won't stop looking for that map, and Sarah won't be safe until he's exposed or stopped." The implications hung in the air between them. "I'm not an assassin," Miles said quietly. "I'm not asking you to be." Rebecca's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "I'm asking you to help me save my daughter, to fight one more battle for someone who can't fight for themselves." Miles stood abruptly, walking to the edge of the porch. His back to Rebecca, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "I had a son once and a wife. They died of fever while I was away, hunting a man the government wanted found." He gripped the porch railing. "I was good at finding people. Too good. And while I was tracking a stranger across Tennessee, my own family needed me." He turned to face her. "So don't talk to me about fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. Sometimes the people who need you most are the ones you've already failed." Rebecca didn't flinch from his anger. "Then help me not fail my daughter." Miles didn't answer. He picked up the whiskey bottle and walked into the darkness beyond the house. Rebecca watched him go, then reached into her dress lining and pulled out her daughter's drawing. In the faint light from the house, she traced her finger over the childish lines, a single tear trailing down her cheek. Miles didn't return until dawn, his clothes damp with dew, his eyes bloodshot from a night without sleep. He found Rebecca in the kitchen, attempting to prepare breakfast despite her injuries. "Sit," he said gruffly. "I'll do that." She obeyed, watching as he expertly cracked eggs into a pan, sliced bread, and brewed coffee. He moved with efficient precision, a man accustomed to caring for himself. "I'm riding into town today," he announced as he set a plate before her. "Need supplies." Rebecca looked up sharply. "You shouldn't go alone. Porter's men..." Need to see me living my normal life, Miles interrupted. If I hide, they'll know something's wrong. Then I'm coming with you. Miles shook his head. You're not strong enough yet, and you'd be recognized. I need to find out about Sarah, please. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. Miles sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I'll ask around, carefully, but you stay here. He fixed her with a stern look. There's a shotgun under my bed. Anyone comes who isn't me, you use it. Understood. Rebecca nodded, relief and fear mingling in her expression. Miles finished his breakfast in silence, then prepared for the ride to town. He dressed in his usual attire, worn denims, cotton shirt, leather vest, but added a gun belt with a Colt revolver. Not his preferred weapon, but necessary for town. The Winchester rifle went into a saddle holster. Before leaving, he paused at the door. Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone. Rebecca nodded, then asked, what if you don't come back? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Then ride west, Miles said simply. Keep going till you hit California. Start over. With that, he was gone, mounting his bay gelding and riding toward Tombstone. The town had changed since Miles had last visited months ago. New buildings stood where empty lots had been, a sign of Tombstone's continued growth, despite the decline in silver mining. The main street bustled with activity, merchants, miners, cowboys, and the occasional well-dressed businessman. Miles tied his horse outside the general store and went about his business with practiced efficiency, purchasing flour, coffee, ammunition, and medical supplies. He kept his interactions brief, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. At the saloon, he paused. The Oriental was the center of Tombstone's information network, a place where gossip flowed as freely as whiskey. If he wanted news about Porter or Rebecca's daughter, this was where to start. The saloon was dim and smoky, inside sparsely populated in the early afternoon. Miles ordered a whiskey and took it to a corner table back to the wall where he could observe the room. He didn't have to wait long. A stooped figure approached, moving with the careful gait of the elderly. Well, well, the hermit emerges from his cave. Miles looked up into the roomy eyes of Doc Sullivan, once the most feared dentist and gambler in the territory, now a shadow of his former self. Tuberculosis had whittled him down, but his mind remained sharp. Doc, Miles acknowledged with a nod. Take a seat if you are going to. The old man eased himself into a chair, wheezing slightly. Must be something important to bring you to town. You're about as social as a rattlesnake with a toothache. Miles allowed a small smile. Just supplies. Bullshit, Doc said cheerfully. You've got that look, the one that says you're hunting. Miles took a slow sip of his whiskey. Just curious about some things happening in town. Such as Judge Porter. Heard he's been busy lately. Doc's expression sobered. Porter's always busy, building his little empire. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Word is, he's been acquiring property. And not just land, people. Miles kept his face neutral. Slavery's been over a while now, Doc. Tell that to the women who go missing, or the Chinese workers who disappear from the mines. Doc coughed a wet, rattling sound. Porter calls it indentured servitude when anyone dares to question. But everyone knows what it really is. Anyone standing against him. Doc's laugh turned into another cough. The sheriff, he's in Porter's pocket. The newspaper, the last editor who asked questions, ended up dead in an alley. Robbery gone wrong, they said. Thomas Morgan, Miles thought grimly. What about family members, anyone looking for these missing people? Some try. Most get bought off or scared away. Doc studied Miles intently. You asking for a particular reason? Someone you know gone missing, Miles shrugged. Just curious why the law allows it. Law is what men with power say it is, Doc said bitterly. Always has been. Even when Wyatt Earp was cleaning up this town, he was just substituting his law for someone else's. Miles finished his whiskey. One more question. You hear anything about a little girl about 7 years old, named Sarah? Might have been taken by Porter or his men. Doc's eyes narrowed. You're playing with fire, Miles. Just answer the question. Doc sighed. Porter's got a place outside town. Big house with lots of guards. Rumor is he keeps special guests there. Could be your girl is there if Porter took her. Miles nodded, placing a coin on the table. Thanks, Doc. As he stood to leave, Doc grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Whatever you're planning, don't. Porter's not just a corrupt judge. He's got connections all the way to the governor. And he's obsessed with finding something, some old treasure. Man like that with that kind of obsession and power. Doc shook his head. He'll kill anyone who gets in his way. Miles gently removed Doc's hand. I'll keep that in mind. Outside, Miles mounted his horse and rode slowly through town, memorizing the layout, noting changes since his last visit. As he passed the courthouse, he saw a figure watching from an upper window, a tall man in a black suit, his face partially obscured by the reflection on the glass. Judge Porter, Miles guessed. Already aware of his presence in town. The ride back to the ranch was tense, Miles constantly checking for followers. None materialized, but the feeling of being watched never left him. As he approached his property, movement caught his eye, a rider on the eastern ridge. The Watcher. But this time, instead of staying distant, the figure turned and rode directly toward Miles's ranch. Miles spurred his horse to a gallop, racing to intercept the rider before they reached the house. His hand went to the Winchester, pulling it smoothly from its holster as he rode. The two riders converged in a cloud of dust 100 yards from the ranch house. Miles raised his rifle, aimed at the stranger's chest. "That's far enough," he called. The rider stopped, raising empty hands slowly. "I'm not here to fight Sullivan." The man was Native American, older than Miles by perhaps a decade, his face deeply lined, long gray hair tied back. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle. "Who are you?" Miles demanded, rifle still raised. "My people call me Eagle Eye." The man's voice was calm, his English perfect but accented. "I've been watching you and the woman." "Why?" "Because Porter's men are also watching, and because I have been waiting for you to remember who you are." The man lowered his hand slowly. "You were once a warrior who fought for what he believed in. I think perhaps you will be again." Miles frowned. "You know nothing about me." "I know more than you think, Miles Sullivan." Eagle Eye's dark eyes seemed to pierce through him. "I know you served under Sherman. I know you burned villages. And I know you have tried to bury those memories here in the desert." Miles's finger tightened on the trigger. "How do you know these things?" "Because I was there," Eagle Eye said simply. "My village was one of those your soldiers burned. I watched from the hills as my home turned to ash." A cold knot formed in Miles's stomach. "If you're here for revenge, get on with it." Eagle Eye shook his head. "If I wanted you dead, you would be already. I have had many chances over the years." A faint smile touched his lips. "I have been watching you for a very long time, Miles Sullivan. Waiting. For what? For you to wake up, to remember that running from the past does not erase it." Eagle Eye nodded toward the ranch house. "That woman brought your past back to you, and now you must choose continue hiding or stand and fight." Miles lowered his rifle slightly, confusion replacing anger. "What's your stake in this?" "Porter has taken land from my people, killed those who resisted, and now he searches for something that does not belong to him, something sacred." Eagle Eye's expression hardened. "The treasure he seeks is not gold as he believes. It is proof documents that show this land was given to the Apache by treaty, documents the government would prefer remain lost." Miles's mind raced, connecting pieces. "And you think Porter has these documents?" "No, he has part of a map. The woman's husband found it, I believe. But there are other pieces." Eagle Eye reached slowly into his saddlebag and withdrew something wrapped in buckskin. "Like this one." He unwrapped it, revealing a yellowed piece of paper with partial markings, what appeared to be part of a map. "Together, these pieces will lead to the documents and to gold that was hidden with them. Porter wants the gold. I want the documents." Eagle Eye rewrapped the paper carefully. "The woman wants her child. I think perhaps we can help each other." Miles studied the Apache, weighing his words. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," Eagle Eye said bluntly. "Trust must be earned. But we have a common enemy and time grows short. Porter will move soon, either against you directly or against those who might help you." As if to punctuate his words, a gunshot echoed from the direction of the ranch house. Then another. Miles wheeled his horse around, heart pounding. "Rebecca," he spurred his horse into a gallop, racing toward the house, aware of Eagle Eye following close behind. The front door of the ranch house stood open. Miles dismounted in a fluid motion, rifle raised, and moved swiftly to the entrance. Inside, he found Rebecca standing in the main room, the shotgun in her hand, smoke still curling from the barrel. On the floor lay a man, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. "He came through the window," Rebecca said, her voice remarkably steady. "Said Porter sent him to bring me back." She looked up at Miles, her eyes hard. "I told you they would come." Miles knelt beside the dead man, searching his pockets. He found a folded paper, orders to retrieve the woman and bring her to Porter's estate. And something else, a small, tintype photograph of a little girl, dark-haired and solemn-eyed, holding a cloth doll. "Sarah," Rebecca whispered, taking the photograph with trembling hands. "She's alive." Miles stood, his decision made. The world he tried to leave behind had found him. The past he tried to bury had resurfaced. There would be no more running. "Pack whatever you can carry," he told Rebecca. "We leave in an hour." "Where are we going?" she asked, still clutching the photograph. Miles glanced at Eagle Eye, who stood in the doorway observing silently. "To war," Miles answered simply. Again. The sun was setting over the desert, painting the landscape in blood-red hues. As darkness fell, 3 riders left the ranch, heading not toward Tombstone, but deeper into the wilderness, where the shadows would hide them and give them time to plan. Behind them, the ranch house burned a beacon in the night, a signal that Miles Sullivan was done hiding. The battle for Rebecca's daughter, for the Apache documents, for justice in a lawless land, had begun. And this time, Miles wasn't fighting for a cause he didn't believe in, or for a government that used him as a weapon. This time, he was fighting for redemption. The desert at night belonged to ghosts and memories. Miles had learned this during his first weeks in Arizona, when sleep eluded him, and he would walk under stars so bright they seemed to press down on him. The vastness made a man feel small, insignificant. It also made his sins seem smaller specks of dust in an infinite landscape. But not tonight. Tonight, the weight of the past rode with them, three silhouettes moving through darkness, following game trails and dry creek beds to avoid leaving tracks. The burning ranch behind them cast an orange glow on the horizon visible for miles. A message to Porter, the game had changed. Miles led the way, Rebecca rode in the middle, and Eagle Eye brought up the rear, his keen eyes constantly scanning for pursuit. They had been riding for hours, the horses tired but steady. Rebecca swayed slightly in the saddle, her wounds making the journey painful, but she hadn't complained once. Finally, as the eastern sky began to lighten, Miles guided them into a narrow canyon. The walls rose steep on either side, providing shelter from both sun and watching eyes. "We'll rest here," he announced, dismounting stiffly. Eagle Eye nodded approval. "Good choice, water nearby." He pointed to a small seep at the base of the canyon wall where moisture gathered in a shallow pool. They established camp with practiced efficiency, Miles and Eagle Eye working in silent coordination that spoke of years spent in wilderness, Rebecca following their lead despite her exhaustion. No fire was lit. It was too dangerous. As the horses drank and grazed on sparse vegetation, the three travelers sat in the shadow of a boulder, sharing jerky and hardtack from Miles's provisions. "Porter will have men searching by now," Rebecca said, breaking the silence. "They'll find the body at your ranch." "That was the point," Miles replied. "Let them waste time searching there while we move in the other direction." "And where exactly are we going?" Rebecca asked, her eyes moving between Miles and Eagle Eye. Miles looked to the Apache, deferring the question. Eagle Eye pulled the buckskin-wrapped map fragment from his saddlebag. "We need the other pieces of this map to find what Porter seeks. Your husband found one piece. Where is it now?" Rebecca's hand unconsciously moved to the small pocket where she kept her daughter's drawing. "With Sarah, hidden in her doll, but I don't know where Sarah is." "Porter's estate," Miles said. "According to Doc Sullivan, that's where he keeps special guests." "It is heavily guarded," Eagle Eye added. "Many men with guns, stone walls, like a fortress." Rebecca's face fell. "Then how do we get to her?" Miles leaned forward, his voice low but determined. "We don't attack directly. That's suicide. We need information first, then a plan." He turned to Eagle Eye. "You said Porter's looking for documents proving Apache land rights. Why does he want them?" "To destroy them," Eagle Eye said simply. "The treaties give my people claim to land that holds silver, copper, and water. With the documents gone, there is no proof. The government can take what it wants." "And the gold," Miles pressed. "Payment from the Union Army to the Apache for safe passage during the war. Hidden with the documents for safekeeping." Eagle Eye's expression darkened. "Many died protecting these secrets, including my son." The revelation hung in the air. Rebecca reached out briefly, touching Eagle Eye's weathered hand. "I'm sorry." The Apache nodded, accepting her sympathy with dignity. Miles stood pacing the small area of their camp. "So Porter wants the gold and needs to destroy the documents. We need to rescue Sarah and get the map piece she has." He stopped, looking at Eagle Eye. "You have a piece. Rebecca's daughter has a piece." "Is there more?" "One more," Eagle Eye confirmed. "Held by a man in Tombstone. A banker named Holloway." Miles raised an eyebrow. "Why would a banker have part of an Apache treasure map?" "Because he was once a Union officer," Eagle Eye explained. "Captain James Holloway. He helped hide the gold and documents during the war. When fighting ended, he stayed, became part of the town." "And Porter doesn't know he has it?" Rebecca asked. "Porter suspects but cannot move against a respected banker without proof." Eagle Eye's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Unlike a newspaperman or a schoolteacher, some people are too powerful to simply disappear." Miles resumed pacing. "So we need to contact this Holloway, see if he'll help us." "And how do we do that without alerting Porter's men?" Rebecca asked. "They'll be watching for us in town." Miles turned to her, a grim smile on his face. "We don't go as ourselves." Tombstone's First National Bank stood imposing on Allen Street, its stone facade a statement of permanence in a town built largely of wood. Inside, behind a polished desk in a private office, James Holloway reviewed ledgers with the careful attention that had made him one of the territory's most successful bankers. At 62, Holloway retained the rigid posture of his military days. His beard was neatly trimmed white against his tanned skin, his suit impeccable despite the desert heat. A gold watch chain draped across his vest, connecting to a timepiece that had been with him since Antietam. A knock at the door interrupted his concentration. "Enter, Gordon," he called, not looking up. His secretary, a young man with carefully combed hair, opened the door. "Sir, there's an Apache here to see you. Says he's selling horses." Holloway frowned. "I'm not in the market for horses, Roberts." "Yes, sir, that's what I told him. But he insisted you'd want to see these particular horses. Said something about them being descendants of Sherman's Mount." Holloway's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly alert. "Sherman's Mount, you say?" "Yes, sir, that's what he said." Holloway closed the ledger deliberately. "Send him in." Moments later, Eagle Eye entered dressed in simple clothing, leading a bay gelding that Holloway recognized immediately as a cavalry-bred animal. The Apache's face betrayed nothing as he nodded respectfully. Mr. Holloway, I bring horses of exceptional bloodline. Holloway dismissed the secretary with a wave. When the door closed, he spoke quietly. I know you. You're Shadow Walker's son. Eagle Eye nodded once. And you are Captain Holloway, who helped my father hide what must not be found. Holloway's shoulders tensed. That was a long time ago. Why come to me now? Because Porter seeks what was hidden. He has part of the map. Others have other parts. Eagle Eye's voice remained level. The time has come to either unite the pieces or destroy them all. Holloway stood abruptly, moving to the window. He checked the street below before pulling the curtains closed. Porter's been asking questions. Subtle at first, then less so. The banker's voice hardened. 2 weeks ago, my house was broken into. Nothing was taken, but my study was searched thoroughly. Did he find what he sought? Holloway gave a short, humorless laugh. No, I learned in the war never to keep valuable intelligence where others might expect it. He returned to his desk, unlocking a drawer. I've been waiting for this day, dreading it, if I'm honest. From the drawer, he removed a small key which he pressed into Eagle Eye's palm. Safe deposit box, number 27. The bank across the street, not this one. Holloway's eyes met Eagle Eye's. Too obvious to keep it here. The map piece is inside, along with letters from your father that prove the treaty's legitimacy. Eagle Eye closed his fingers around the key. You have honored your promise to my father. The Apache will remember. I'm an old man now, Holloway said quietly. Too old to fight another war. But there's a Remington rifle and ammunition in the box as well. My contribution to your cause. We thank you, Eagle Eye said, but we need more than weapons. We need to know about Porter's estate, his defenses, where he might keep a child prisoner. Holloway's eyebrows rose. A child? Porter has taken a little girl to control her mother, who has another piece of the map. The banker's face darkened with anger. That crosses a line even Porter shouldn't dare. He moved to a cabinet and withdrew a rolled paper. This is a survey map of the county. Porter's estate is here, about 3 miles east of town. He spread the map on his desk, pointing to a large property marked with the name Porter. Main house is stone, 2 stories with a cellar beneath. Guards patrol the perimeter day and night. Holloway's finger traced the outline. But there's a weakness. The water supply comes from this creek through pipes that enter the cellar. The intake is here, hidden in a stand of cottonwoods. A man could follow the pipe, and though it would be a tight fit. Eagle Eye studied the map intently, memorizing every detail. One more thing, Holloway said, lowering his voice further. Porter has a special guest arriving tomorrow. Some government man from back east. Rumors say he's coming about the Apache land dispute. Could be coincidence. There are no coincidences in war, Eagle Eye finished. When does this man arrive? Noon stage from Tucson. Eagle Eye nodded, committing this to memory as well. We are in your debt, Captain. Holloway shook his head. I made a promise to your father. The debt was mine. He hesitated, then added, if you need a place to stay somewhere safe, I have a line shack on my cattle property. No one goes there this time of year. It's here. He marked a spot on the map. Your generosity will not be forgotten. Eagle Eye said carefully, folding the map and tucking it away. As the Apache turned to leave, Holloway called after him softly. Tell whoever's with you. Porter is not just a corrupt judge. There's something wrong with the man. Something broken. He enjoys causing pain. Be careful. Eagle Eye nodded once more, then slipped out the door, leading the horse, just another Native American doing business in town. Outside, he passed a woman in a simple dress and bonnet, her face partially obscured, carrying a basket of eggs. Rebecca in disguise, on her way to gather information in the town market. Neither acknowledged the other as they went about their separate missions. Miles waited at the rendezvous point, a small grove of mesquite trees a mile outside town. He changed his appearance as much as possible, shaved his beard, trimmed his hair, exchanged his usual clothes for the garb of a traveling salesman. The transformation wouldn't fool anyone who knew him well, but it might prevent casual recognition. As he waited, he cleaned his rifle methodically, the familiar routine calming his mind. The weapon was more than a tool to him. It was an extension of himself, a reminder of skills he had hoped never to use again. Movement caught his eye, Rebecca approaching on foot, her basket now full of supplies along with the eggs. She moved with purpose, though he could see the strain of her injuries in the stiffness of her gait. Any trouble? He asked as she reached him. She shook her head. No one looked twice at me, just another woman shopping. She set down the basket, revealing bread, cheese, and a bottle of whiskey beneath the eggs. I overheard things in the market, people talking about a fire at a ranch west of town, and about Judge Porter offering a reward for information about a woman matching my description. Miles nodded grimly. Expected as much. What about Sarah? Any word? Rebecca's composure faltered slightly. Nothing specific, but I spoke to a Mexican woman who works as a laundress for Porter's estate. She confirmed there's a child there, a little girl kept in a room on the 2nd floor. Not allowed outside. Hope and fear warred in her expression. Miles placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, an awkward gesture of comfort from a man unaccustomed to offering solace. That's good news, he said. Means she's alive, and we know where to find her. Rebecca nodded, blinking back tears. Yes, now we just have to get her out of a fortress guarded by armed men. She attempted a smile. Simple. Miles almost smiled back, surprised by her resilience. This woman had endured torture separation from her child and the murder of her husband, yet still found the strength for irony. Eagle Eye should be back soon, he said, returning to his rifle. Then we'll make a plan. They waited in companionable silence, each lost in thought. After a while, Rebecca spoke again, her voice softer. That first night when you sat outside my room, you were guarding me, weren't you? Making sure I was safe. Miles continued cleaning his rifle, not meeting her eyes. Just being cautious. No one's done that for me in a long time. Watched over me. She looked down at her hands. Not since Thomas died. Miles said nothing uncomfortable with her gratitude. He was a good man, my husband, Rebecca continued. Believed in justice and standing up for what's right. It got him killed. Her voice hardened. Porter's men beat him to death in an alley behind the newspaper office. Made it look like a robbery. I'm sorry, Miles said, the words feeling inadequate. Rebecca raised her eyes to his. When they brought me to Porter after Thomas died, I thought he'd have me killed too. Instead her hand moved unconsciously to her back where the brand lay hidden. He said he was marking me, so I'd remember my place. Miles's hand stilled on the rifle. We'll make him pay for that. It's not about vengeance, Rebecca said, though her eyes told a different story. It's about Sarah, about making sure she has a future. Before Miles could respond, Eagle Eye appeared silently from among the trees, leading his horse. Success? Miles asked, standing. The Apache nodded, producing the key and the folded map. Holloway has kept his word. The map piece is in a bank vault, and he provided information about Porter's estate. He quickly related what he'd learned, the layout of the property, the water pipe entrance, the coming arrival of a government official. This changes things, Miles said, thinking aloud. If a federal official is coming, Porter will be distracted. Security might be focused on impressing the visitor rather than watching for intruders. Or he could double his guards, Rebecca countered. Holloway offered us shelter, Eagle Eye said. A line shack on his property. We can rest there and make proper plans. Miles nodded. Good. We'll retrieve the map piece from the bank, then head to the shack. After dark, I'll scout Porter's estate, see these water pipes for myself. As they prepared to move out, Rebecca suddenly froze, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. Riders, she whispered, coming this way. Miles immediately dropped to one knee, rifle ready, scanning the horizon. 3 horsemen approached from the direction of Tombstone, moving at a steady trot. Porter's men, Rebecca asked, fear edging her voice. Eagle Eye shook his head. Sheriff and deputies. Regular patrol, perhaps. Or looking for us, Miles said grimly. Mount up, casual pace, act like we belong here. They rode out from the shelter of the trees, angling away from the approaching lawmen, but not so sharply as to appear suspicious. Miles tipped his hat as the distance between the groups narrowed, adopting the easy manner of a traveling man. The sheriff slowed his horse, studying them with narrowed eyes. A heavy-set man with a drooping mustache, he wore his authority like an ill-fitting coat, uncomfortable but determined to make it work. Afternoon, he called. You folks heading to Tombstone? Just leaving, actually, Miles replied amicably. Got business in Bisbee. The sheriff's gaze lingered on Rebecca, whose face remained partially hidden by her bonnet. The lady with you, my sister, Miles lied smoothly, coming to help with my children after my wife's passing. The sheriff seemed to consider this, then nodded. Sorry for your loss. His eyes shifted to Eagle Eye. He with you too. Guide and tracker, Miles said. Not familiar with this territory myself. One of the deputies leaned toward the sheriff, whispering something. The sheriff frowned, then addressed Miles again. Mind if I ask your name, mister? Miles felt tension coil in his stomach, but kept his expression neutral. Samuel Parker, Cincinnati originally. Mr. Parker, we're looking for some folks who might have passed this way. A woman injured, and 2 men, 1 white, 1 Indian. The sheriff's hand rested casually near his holster. You seen anyone like that? Miles shook his head. Can't say we have. Road's been quiet. He gestured vaguely westward. Saw some smoke yesterday, though. Looked like a fire some ways out. The sheriff nodded. Ranch fire. Suspicious circumstances. He studied Miles a moment longer, then apparently decided they weren't worth further questioning. Well, safe travels to Bisbee, Mr. Parker. Appreciate it, Sheriff. The lawman rode on toward Tombstone, and Miles released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was too close, Rebecca murmured when the riders were out of earshot. It's going to get closer, Miles replied. Let's move. Bank first, then the line shack. The safe deposit box contained exactly what Holloway had promised, a map fragment on aged parchment letters written in Apache and English, detailing the treaties, and a Remington rifle with ammunition. Eagle Eye examined the map piece with reverence, carefully placing it with the fragment he already possessed. 2 pieces of 3, he said, almost complete. They reached the line shack as dusk was settling over the desert. The small structure was basic but solid, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Rebecca immediately set about making the place habitable, her teacher's instinct for order asserting itself. Eagle Eye tended the horses while Miles inventoried their weapons and supplies. As night fell, they shared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. The domestic normalcy of it felt strange to Miles, who had grown accustomed to solitary evenings. Stranger still was how comfortable it felt, despite the circumstances. After eating, Eagle Eye spread the combined map fragments on the table. Even incomplete, a picture was emerging, landmarks, directions, and what appeared to be the location of a cave in a distinctive rock formation. The third piece would show the exact location, Eagle Eye explained. Without it, we could search for months and never find the entrance. Miles studied the map thoughtfully. Porter doesn't have the other pieces. He doesn't know we've combined these two. That gives us an advantage. Only if we can get Sarah out, Rebecca said firmly. That's the priority. Miles nodded. Agreed. I'll scout the estate tonight, assess the water pipe entry Holloway mentioned. I should come with you, Eagle Eye said. Miles shook his head. Too risky for both of us to go. If I'm caught, you and Rebecca will need to find another way. He began checking his weapons, a knife, his revolver, and a smaller derringer that could be hidden in his boot. Rebecca watched him prepare, concern evident in her expression. Be careful, she said softly. Sarah needs all of us. Miles met her gaze, struck by the genuine worry in her eyes. It had been a long time since anyone had cared whether he returned from a mission. The feeling was both comforting and unsettling. I'll be back before dawn, he promised. The night was clear and cool as Miles made his way toward Porter's estate, moving silently through the desert landscape. The moon, nearly full, cast enough light to navigate by, while still allowing shadows for concealment. Porter's estate came into view shortly before midnight, a sprawling property surrounded by a high stone wall. The main house rose like a fortress in the center, windows glowing with lamplight, despite the late hour. Miles circled the perimeter, staying well back, counting guards and noting patrol patterns. 8 men that he could see moving in pairs, each circuit taking approximately 20 minutes. Following Holloway's directions, he located the creek and the stand of cottonwoods that concealed the water intake. The area was less heavily patrolled, with guards passing only once per hour. Miles waited for a patrol to pass, then moved quickly to the cottonwoods. The water intake was there, as described, a metal grate covering a pipe approximately 2 feet in diameter. The grate was secured with a padlock, old and rusted. He examined it carefully. The lock would be easy enough to pick or break. The pipe itself was large enough for a man to crawl through, though it would be a tight fit. Water flowed through the bottom about 6 inches deep, enough to make the journey uncomfortable but not impossible. Miles traced the pipe's path with his eyes. It disappeared into the ground, presumably running underground to the house's cellar. A viable entry point, just as Holloway had suggested. As he prepared to withdraw, voices reached him, guards approaching. Miles pressed himself against the trunk of a cottonwood, becoming one with the shadows. New girl's a pretty one guard was saying. Porter's got her all cleaned up for the government man's visit. Lucky bastard, the second guard replied. We risk our necks out here, and he gets all the comforts. Speaking of comfort, I heard the little girl's been asking for her mother again, crying at night. Porter should just get rid of her. Too much trouble. Nah, he needs her. Says the mother will come for her eventually. Then he'll have them both. The first guard laughed. And the map piece, don't forget that. Porter's obsessed with finding that treasure. You believe it exists? Don't know, don't care. Long as Porter keeps paying, I'll help him chase ghosts. Their voices faded as they moved past the cottonwoods, continuing their patrol. Miles remained motionless until he was certain they were gone, then silently made his way back into the desert. His mind worked as he traveled, processing what he'd learned. The water pipe was viable. Sarah was definitely in the house. And Porter was expecting Rebecca to come for her daughter had set a trap. But Porter didn't know about Eagle Eye or about Miles himself. He was expecting a desperate mother, not a former Army scout and an Apache warrior. That misplaced confidence would be his weakness. Dawn was breaking as Miles returned to the line shack. He found Rebecca awake, sitting by the window, a cup of coffee cooling before her. Relief washed over her face when she saw him. You're back, she said simply. Told you I would be. Miles accepted the cup of coffee she offered, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Where's Eagle Eye? Hunting, said we needed fresh meat. Rebecca studied his face. What did you find? Miles related his discoveries, the layout, the guards, the water pipe entrance, and the conversation he'd overheard. Sarah's there, he confirmed. Alive and well enough to be asking for you. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, composing herself. And Porter's using her as bait, waiting for me. Yes, but he's not expecting us to come in from below. Miles outlined his plan, using the water pipe to enter the cellar, then finding Sarah and extracting her during the government official's visit, when attention would be diverted. Rebecca listened intently, asking occasional questions. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. It could work, she finally said, but it's incredibly dangerous. No more dangerous than leaving Sarah there, Miles pointed out. Porter knows you have a map piece. Eventually, he'll decide Sarah isn't enough leverage and come looking for you directly. Rebecca nodded, her resolve visibly strengthening. When do we move? Tomorrow, when the government man arrives. Miles drained his coffee cup. We'll need supplies. Rope, dark clothing, weapons. You can conceal. I can shoot, Rebecca said, anticipating his next question. Thomas taught me, after he started receiving threats. Miles nodded unsurprised. Good, you'll need to. Eagle Eye returned shortly after bringing 2 rabbits he'd snared. As he prepared them for cooking, Miles outlined the plan. The Apache listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. It is a good plan, he said when Miles finished, but I would make one change. The woman should not enter the house. Rebecca immediately protested. It's my daughter in there. Precisely, Eagle Eye said calmly. Your emotions will make you vulnerable. And if Porter sees you, he will know something is wrong. His men are looking for a mother, not 2 men. Miles considered this. He's right, Rebecca. You'd be recognized more easily than either of us. I won't stay behind while you risk your lives for my daughter, Rebecca insisted, her voice rising. Not behind, Eagle Eye clarified. Outside, with horses ready. When we find the child, we will need to leave quickly. Someone must secure our escape. Rebecca looked from Eagle Eye to Miles, clearly torn between maternal instinct and tactical necessity. He's making sense, Miles said gently. We need you, just not inside. After a long moment, Rebecca nodded reluctantly. Fine. But if anything goes wrong, if Sarah is in danger, I'm coming in after her. Understood? Miles met her determined gaze and saw not just a mother's love, but a fighter's resolve. This woman had endured Porter's cruelty and emerged not broken but hardened like steel, tempered in fire. Understood, he agreed. They spent the remainder of the day preparing cleaning weapons, gathering supplies, studying the map of Porter's estate that Eagle Eye had memorized from Holloway's survey. As the evening approached, a strange calm settled over the trio, the calm that comes before battle when all preparations are made and only waiting remains. After dinner, Rebecca excused herself to step outside. Miles found her later sitting on a fallen log staring at the stars. Without a word, he sat beside her, offering a cup of coffee laced with whiskey. She accepted it with a small smile of thanks. When I was a girl, she said after a while, my father taught me the constellations, said they were stories written in the sky, unchanging, no matter what happened on Earth. She took a sip of the coffee. I've been looking for Orion. That was Sarah's favorite, but it's the wrong season. Miles looked up at the vast canopy of stars. I never learned their names, just used them for navigation. Always practical. Rebecca observed a hint of teasing in her voice. Had to be. In my line of work, practical kept you alive. And what about now, she asked, turning to study his profile in the moonlight. Is this practical, helping a woman you barely know rescue her daughter from a powerful man? Miles considered the question. No, he admitted, not practical at all. Then why? The question hung between them, simple yet profound. Miles took a long drink of his coffee, weighing his words. Because sometimes practical isn't right, he finally said. And because I've spent too long hiding from what I've done. Maybe it's time to do something worth doing. Rebecca's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers cool against his skin. Thank you, she whispered, for being impractical. Miles didn't pull away, allowing the contact, the human connection he'd denied himself for so long. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, each lost in thoughts of the day to come. Inside the shack, Eagle Eye observed them through the window, a knowing expression crossing his face. Then he turned away, giving them their privacy, and continued preparing for battle. Tomorrow they would confront Porter. Tomorrow they would attempt to rescue Sarah. Tomorrow the past and present would collide in ways none of them could fully predict. But tonight, for this brief moment, there was peace in the desert, a fragile, fleeting peace that Miles hadn't known in years. The government man arrived precisely at noon as scheduled. The stagecoach rolled into Tombstone in a cloud of dust, drawing the attention of townspeople and Porter's men alike. From their vantage point on a hill overlooking the town, Miles, Rebecca, and Eagle Eye watched through a spyglass as a tall figure in an Eastern suit descended from the coach, greeted by Judge Porter himself. Right on time, Miles murmured. Porter's occupied. Now we move. They had spent the morning positioning themselves, establishing a camp in a dry wash half a mile from Porter's estate. The horses were hidden in a stand of scrub oak, saddled and ready for a quick departure. Rebecca, dressed in dark clothing with a bandana ready to cover her face, would wait with the mounts, while Miles and Eagle Eye infiltrated the estate. Remember, Miles told her as they prepared to part ways, if we're not back by sunset, take the horses and ride for Tucson. Find the federal marshal there. Tell him everything. Rebecca shook her head firmly. I'm not leaving without Sarah. You might have to, Miles said, his voice gentle but insistent. Sarah needs her mother alive, not captured or killed in a rescue attempt. Rebecca looked as though she wanted to argue further, but instead pulled something from her pocket, the small drawing her daughter had made. Give this to her, she said, pressing it into Miles's hand. So she knows I'm here, that I came for her. Miles nodded carefully, tucking the drawing into his shirt pocket. We'll bring her back, I promise. The sincerity in his voice surprised even him. Miles Sullivan, who had spent years avoiding promises he couldn't keep now, made one that mattered more than any before. Eagle Eye approached, carrying the Remington rifle Holloway had provided. It is time, he said simply. With a final nod to Rebecca, the two men departed, making their way toward the water intake pipe Miles had located the night before. They moved silently, using the terrain for cover, avoiding the patrol routes Miles had memorized. Reaching the cottonwoods without incident, they found the water pipe, as Miles had described. Eagle Eye produced a set of slim metal tools, lockpicks fashioned from horseshoe nails. My father taught me, he explained at Miles's questioning look. Said understanding white man's locks was important. The rusted padlock yielded quickly to Eagle Eye's skilled hands. They removed the grate, revealing the dark tunnel of the pipe stretching before them. I'll go first, Miles said, pulling the bandana up to cover his nose and mouth. Wait for my signal before following. Eagle Eye nodded, taking up a position where he could watch for patrols while Miles entered the pipe. The tunnel was even tighter than Miles had anticipated, forcing him to crawl on his stomach through 6 inches of cold flowing water. The darkness was absolute, the sound of his own breathing echoing metallically around him. He fought down a surge of claustrophobia, focusing on moving forward inch by inch. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only minutes, the pipe began to slope upward. Eventually it terminated in another grate, this one secured from the inside. Miles pressed against it experimentally. It moved slightly but was held in place by some mechanism he couldn't see in the darkness. Withdrawing a small knife from his boot, Miles worked it through the grate, feeling for a latch or lock. His fingers, numbed by the cold water, fumbled slightly before finding what he sought, a simple hook and eye securing the grate. With careful manipulation, he managed to lift the hook free. The grate swung open and Miles emerged into a dim cellar, dripping water onto a stone floor. He quickly oriented himself. Stone walls lined with shelves of provisions, a wooden staircase leading upward, a single lamp burning low on a far wall. No guards were visible. Miles crossed to the staircase and listened intently. Hearing nothing, he returned to the pipe and gave a low whistle to signal for Eagle Eye to follow. While waiting, Miles took stock of his surroundings more thoroughly. The cellar was larger than he'd expected, with several barrels of what smelled like whiskey, crates of supplies, and a locked cabinet that likely contained valuables. A second smaller staircase led to what appeared to be a separate exit, perhaps to the outside or to another part of the house. Eagle Eye emerged from the pipe with considerably more grace than Miles had managed, seeming barely damp despite the water. He surveyed the cellar with sharp eyes, then pointed to the smaller staircase. Servants' access, he whispered. Less likely to be guarded. Miles nodded agreement, and they moved silently toward the stairs. At the top, a simple wooden door stood closed but not locked. Miles eased it open a crack, peering into what proved to be a kitchen. A Mexican woman worked alone, kneading dough on a large table, her back to the door. Miles exchanged a glance with Eagle Eye, weighing their options. They needed information about Sarah's exact location, but revealing themselves risked exposure. The decision was made for them when the woman turned, catching sight of the partially open door. Her eyes widened in alarm. Before she could cry out, Eagle Eye stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Spanish. Miles caught only fragments. No harm. The child. Help us. To his surprise, the woman's expression shifted from fear to cautious interest. She responded in Spanish too quickly for Miles to follow, but he recognized the tone of someone providing information. Eagle Eye listened intently, then nodded thanks. The woman made a shooing motion toward a side door, then returned to her bread making as if nothing had happened. The child is upstairs, Eagle Eye whispered as they slipped through the indicated door into a narrow hallway. Second floor, east wing. Room with blue door. 1 guard. The woman's helping us, Miles asked, surprised. Porter took her son 2 months ago, sold him to work in mines. Eagle Eye's expression darkened. She has been waiting for a chance at vengeance. They moved through the house with extreme caution, using service corridors where possible. Voices echoed from distant rooms, Porter entertaining his government guest servants, going about their duties. Twice they had to duck into empty rooms to avoid detection. Finally, they reached the east wing, climbing a back staircase to the 2nd floor. The hallway stretched before them, doors on either side, one painted a distinctive blue halfway down the corridor. As Eagle Eye had warned, a guard stood outside, looking bored but alert. He was armed with a revolver, his posture suggesting a man prepared for a long, dull assignment. Miles and Eagle Eye withdrew to confer. Distraction, Eagle Eye suggested. Miles considered, then shook his head. Too risky. Might alert others. He withdrew the derringer from his boot. I'll take him. Quick and quiet. Eagle Eye nodded, positioning himself to watch the hallway in both directions. Miles approached silently, derringer concealed in his palm. The guard noticed him too late, reaching for his weapon as Miles pressed the small gun to his ribs. Not a sound, Miles warned. There's a second gun aimed at your back. It was a bluff, but the guard believed it, freezing in place. The girl in that room, Miles continued. Is she alone? The guard nodded, swallowing hard. Keys. The guard slowly reached into his pocket and produced a ring of keys. Smart man, Miles said. Now turn around, hands on the wall. As the guard complied, Miles brought the butt of the derringer down hard on the base of his skull. The man crumpled unconsciously to the floor. Eagle Eye moved swiftly to help Miles drag the guard into a nearby empty room where they bound and gagged him with strips torn from bed sheets. Returning to the blue door, Miles tried keys until one turned in the lock. He eased the door open, unsure what to expect. The room beyond was surprisingly pleasant, spacious, well-furnished, with windows looking out over gardens. A little girl sat on the bed, dark-haired and solemn-eyed, clutching a cloth doll. She looked up as the door opened, fear flashing across her face. "It's all right," Miles said softly, lowering his bandana. "We're friends of your mother. She sent us to take you to her." The girl, Sarah, regarded him suspiciously. "Where's my mama?" "Waiting for you, not far from here." Miles crouched to her level, speaking gently. "She asked me to give you this." He withdrew the drawing from his pocket, offering it to her. Sarah took it cautiously, the recognition dawning in her eyes. "I made this for Mama," she whispered. "She kept it safe," Miles said. "And now she sent it back to you so you'd know we really come from her." Sarah studied him, then eagle-eyed with a child's directness. "Are you going to hurt the bad men?" "If we have to," Miles answered honestly. "But right now, we just want to get you back to your mother. Can you come with us?" Quietly, Sarah nodded, clutching her doll tighter. "Penny comes too." "Of course," Miles agreed, guessing the doll's name. "Penny is very important." As Sarah slid off the bed, Eagle Eye suddenly tensed his head, turning toward the door. "Someone comes," he warned. Miles listened. Footsteps approached, multiple sets moving with purpose. "Hide," he instructed Sarah, guiding her toward a large wardrobe. "No matter what happens, stay quiet until one of us comes for you." The little girl nodded solemnly and climbed into the wardrobe with her doll. Miles closed the door just as voices became audible in the hallway. "Check on the girl," a man was saying. "Porter wants her presentable for our guest." Miles and Eagle Eye exchanged glances. No time to hide. They positioned themselves on either side of the room's door, weapons ready. The door handle turned. Miles prepared to strike. But before the door could open fully, a commotion erupted elsewhere in the house, shouting the sound of breaking glass, then a gunshot. The person at the door hesitated, then the footsteps retreated rapidly, responding to the disturbance. Miles moved to the window, peering out cautiously. In the courtyard below, men ran toward the main entrance, weapons drawn. "Something's wrong," he muttered. Eagle Eye joined him at the window. "A diversion." Before Miles could respond, the answer presented itself in the form of Rebecca Morgan, riding full tilt toward the house on horseback, firing a rifle into the air. "Damn it," Miles swore. "She was supposed to wait." "The mother grew impatient," Eagle Eye observed. "Now we must adapt." Miles rapidly reassessed the situation. Rebecca's diversion would draw attention away from the East Wing temporarily, but also bring every guard on the property into alert status. New plan, he decided. We use the confusion. Take the girl out through the cellar while everyone's focused on Rebecca. Eagle Eye nodded agreement. Miles opened the wardrobe, finding Sarah huddled inside, eyes wide with fear. "Change of plans," he told her gently. "Your mother's here, but we need to move quickly and stay very quiet. Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, clutching Penny the doll tightly to her chest. Miles lifted her into his arms, and together with Eagle Eye, they moved swiftly into the hallway. The house had erupted into chaos, servants running, guards shouting orders, Porter's voice bellowing from somewhere below. They made it to the servants' staircase without being spotted, descending rapidly toward the kitchen. The Mexican woman who had helped them earlier stood by the cellar door, gesturing urgently for them to hurry. "Porter's men are everywhere," she warned in accented English. "The woman outside, they are trying to capture her." Miles felt a surge of fear for Rebecca, but forced himself to focus on the immediate task, getting Sarah to safety. "Thank you," he told the woman. "If you can create more confusion, anything to keep them distracted." She nodded, a fierce smile crossing her face. "With pleasure, senor." They descended into the cellar, moving quickly toward the water pipe. Miles set Sarah down, kneeling to explain. "This pipe leads outside. It's dark and wet, but it's our way out. I'll go first, then you follow, then my friend will come last. Can you be brave?" Sarah looked at the pipe dubiously, then back to Miles. "Is Mama really outside?" "Yes," Miles promised, "and she's in danger because she came for you. So we need to hurry." That seemed to decide the matter for Sarah. She nodded firmly, squaring her small shoulders. Miles was about to enter the pipe when the cellar door burst open. Two armed men stood in the doorway, weapons raised. "Don't move," one shouted. "Porter wants the girl." Oh. Eagle Eye reacted with lightning speed, raising the Remington and firing in one fluid motion. The first guard fell, but the second managed to get off a shot before Eagle Eye's second bullet found him. The bullet struck Miles in the left shoulder, spinning him against the wall. Pain exploded through his body, momentarily blinding him. When his vision cleared, he saw Eagle Eye checking the fallen guards, confirming they were no longer threats. Sarah stood frozen, clutching her doll, eyes wide with terror. "It's all right," Miles gasped, fighting through the pain. "We're still going." He pressed his right hand to the wound, feeling warm blood seeping between his fingers. Eagle Eye returned to his side, examining the injury with a critical eye. "Through and through," he reported. "You can travel." "Good, because we have to." Miles straightened, wincing. "More will come when they hear the shots." As if on cue, shouting erupted from above, followed by the sound of running feet. "Go," Eagle Eye said firmly. "Take the child. I will hold them here." Miles started to protest, but the Apache cut him off. "There is no time to argue. The pipe is too small for a quick escape. Someone must delay pursuit." Eagle Eye's eyes held a warrior's resolve. I will find another way out. Miles knew he was right. With his injury slowing him, they needed time to escape through the pipe. We'll wait at the rendezvous point, he said, until sunset. Eagle Eye nodded once, then turned to Sarah. Go with him, little one. Your mother waits. Sarah hesitated, then stepped forward and pressed Penny the doll into Eagle Eye's hands. For luck, she said solemnly. Something flickered in the Apache's stoic expression, surprise, perhaps even tenderness. He accepted the doll with equal solemnity, then gently guided Sarah back to Miles. The documents are what matter, he reminded Miles. If I do not return, find the third map piece. Complete what was started. Miles clasped the Apache's shoulder briefly, a warrior's farewell. Then he turned to the pipe, ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder as he entered the dark tunnel, Sarah following close behind. Behind them, Eagle Eye positioned himself by the cellar door, Remington rifle ready, Penny the doll tucked securely in his belt. The last thing Miles heard as he crawled deeper into the pipe was the sound of the cellar door bursting open, followed by Eagle Eye's defiant war cry and the thunder of the Remington. Then there was only darkness, the sound of water, and Sarah's frightened breathing as they made their escape away from Porter's estate and toward an uncertain reunion with Rebecca. Pain has a voice. In the darkness of the water pipe with cold water numbing his legs and blood soaking his shirt, Miles listened to that voice. It spoke of limits of mortality, of reasons to give up. He'd heard it before on battlefields and field hospitals, during long marches when men fell and didn't rise. But now there was another voice, small and frightened, coming from behind him. Mister, are you okay? Sarah whispered, her words echoing metallically in the confined space. I'm fine, Miles lied, pushing forward through the tunnel. Not much farther now. The pain in his shoulder flared with each movement, but he focused on the task. Get the girl out, find Rebecca, complete the mission. The simplicity of purpose kept him moving when his body wanted to stop. Light appeared ahead, the pipe's exit, daylight filtering through the metal grate. Miles increased his pace, ignoring the black spots dancing at the edges of his vision. He reached the grate, finding it still loose from their entry. With a final push, he emerged into the sunlight, pulling himself onto dry ground. Sarah followed, crawling out more easily with her smaller frame. She stood uncertainly, soaking wet and shivering, looking back toward Porter's estate with wide, frightened eyes. What about the other man? The one with the nice face? Miles struggled to his feet, pressing his hand against his wounded shoulder. He'll find another way out. He hoped he wasn't lying to the child. Gunfire erupted from the direction of the house, multiple shots in rapid succession. Miles instinctively pulled Sarah behind the cover of a large cottonwood, scanning for threats. The commotion seemed centered on the main courtyard, where Rebecca had created her diversion. Rebecca. The thought of her galvanized him. We need to move, he told Sarah. Stay close to me. Run when I run. Stop when I stop. Can you do that? The little girl nodded solemnly, her dark eyes far too serious for a child her age. Miles was struck by how much she resembled her mother, the same determination evident, even in fear. They set off, keeping low, using the sparse vegetation for cover as they moved away from the water pipe. Miles's plan was to circle around to the rendezvous point where the horses should be waiting, assuming Rebecca had left them there before charging in on horseback. The sound of pursuit reached them before they'd gone half a mile, men on horseback, spreading out from the estate, searching. Miles picked up Sarah without warning, ignoring the explosion of pain in his shoulder, and sprinted for a shallow ravine he'd spotted ahead. They reached it just as riders crested a nearby hill. Miles dropped into the ravine, cradling Sarah to cushion her fall, and pressed them both against the earthen wall. Sarah remained remarkably silent, seeming to understand instinctively the need for absolute quiet. Hoofbeats approached, slowed, then stopped directly above them. Miles held his breath, feeling Sarah's small body trembling against his. See anything? A man's voice called. Nothing, another replied. Could have gone east toward the rocks. Check the creek bed. Porter wants the kid alive. The others shoot on sight. The horses moved off, but Miles remained motionless, counting to 100 before cautiously raising his head to look around. The riders had split up, moving in different directions. None appeared to be watching the ravine. We need to keep moving, he whispered to Sarah, but we'll have to be very quiet and very careful. She nodded, clutching the drawing her mother had sent. Miles noticed blood on her dress, his blood transferred when he'd carried her. Are you hurt bad? She asked, seeing him examine the wound. I've had worse, he said, which was true. Nothing that will slow us down. They continued through the ravine, which eventually deepened into a dry wash leading roughly in the direction of their rendezvous point. The going was slow. Miles needed to check frequently for pursuers, and his strength was ebbing as blood loss took its toll. Sarah walked beside him, uncomplaining, occasionally reaching up to hold his hand when the terrain grew difficult. Her trust humbled him, reminding him of another small hand that had once held his with similar confidence, his son's long ago. The sun was beginning its westward descent when they finally approached the stand of scrub oak where they'd left the horses. Miles approached cautiously, signaling Sarah to remain hidden while he scouted ahead. The horses were gone. So was Rebecca. Miles fought down a surge of despair. Without mounts, their chances of escaping Porter's men diminished drastically. And Rebecca, had she been captured, killed, or had she simply been forced to flee? He returned to Sarah, trying to keep his expression neutral. Change of plans, he said. We need to find a place to hide until dark. Where's Mama? Sarah asked immediately, her eyes searching his face. Miles hesitated, weighing truth against comfort. I'm not sure yet, but we'll find her. Sarah seemed to accept this, though her small face grew even more solemn. Is it because she came to help us? Is she in trouble? Your mother is very brave, Miles said, avoiding a direct answer, and very smart. She'll be all right. He hoped that wasn't another lie. They found shelter in a small cave formed by fallen boulders concealed by brush, and nearly invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. Miles's scouting skills had served him well in finding it. The space was just large enough for both of them to sit comfortably hidden from view, but with a clear sightline to watch for threats or for returning friends. As they settled in to wait, Miles tore strips from his shirt to fashion a crude bandage for his shoulder. The bleeding had slowed, but the wound was beginning to show signs of infection, the skin hot and tender to the touch. Sarah watched him work with solemn curiosity. My papa taught me about wounds, she said suddenly, before the bad men hurt him. Miles looked up surprised. Your father taught you, she nodded. Papa was a newspaper man, but he knew doctor things too. He said everyone should. She studied Miles' makeshift bandage with a critical eye. You need clean water and honey. That's what Papa always said for bad cuts. Your father was right, Miles said, touched by her concern. We'll find those things when we can. Papa's in heaven now, Sarah continued matter-of-factly. The bad judge sent men to hurt him because Papa was writing true things the judge didn't like. Miles nodded, uncertain how to respond to a child's understanding of murder. Mama said we had to be extra careful after that, Sarah went on. She taught me to hide things in my doll Penny. Her face fell. I gave Penny to your friend, to help him be brave. That was very kind of you, Miles said gently. Eagle Eye will take good care of Penny. Sarah studied him intently. Are you a good man or a bad man? Mr. The question delivered with a child's directness caught Miles off guard. He considered how to answer. I've done both good and bad things, he said finally. But right now I'm trying to do good. Sarah seemed to accept this. Mama says most people are mixed up, not all good or all bad. Your mother is wise, Miles said. She's a teacher, Sarah replied as if that explained everything. Then after a pause, I'm scared for her. Miles reached out gently, resting his hand on her small shoulder. I know, but we'll find her. I promise. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah eventually dozed off, exhaustion claiming her, despite the circumstances. Miles remained vigilant, watching the desert landscape for any sign of pursuit or of Rebecca and Eagle Eye. His thoughts turned to the Apache warrior. Eagle Eye had stayed behind, facing unknown odds to give them time to escape. The sacrifice reminded Miles of companions lost in war, men who'd given their lives for their brothers in arms. He hadn't expected to find such brotherhood again, especially not with a man whose people he had once helped destroy. Life had a strange way of bringing the past full circle. As shadows lengthened across the desert, Miles's vigilance was rewarded. Movement caught his eye, a lone rider approaching cautiously from the direction of Porter's estate. Miles tensed, reaching for his revolver, then relaxed as he recognized the distinctive silhouette. Rebecca. She rode slowly, scanning the terrain, clearly searching for them. Miles hesitated, wary of exposing their position in case she was being followed. He watched her for several minutes, confirming she was alone, before gently waking Sarah. Your mother's here, he whispered. Sarah was instantly alert, scrambling to the entrance of their hiding place. Miles had to hold her back. Wait, we need to be careful. He took a small mirror from his pocket, a scout's tool for signaling, and angled it to catch the setting sun, sending a brief flash of light in Rebecca's direction. She reined in her horse, immediately searching for the source. Miles flashed the mirror again, then emerged cautiously from cover, keeping Sarah behind him until he was certain it was safe. Rebecca spotted him and spurred her horse forward. As she drew closer, Miles could see she was injured, a bloodied bandage wrapped around her upper arm, her face scratched and dirt-streaked. But her eyes were alert and determined. Miles, she called, relief evident in her voice. Thank God. Then she saw Sarah peering out from behind him, and everything else was forgotten. Rebecca practically fell from the saddle in her haste to reach her daughter. Sarah broke free from Miles's protective hand and ran to her mother, the two colliding in a desperate embrace. Sarah, my baby, my girl, Rebecca sobbed, holding her daughter as if she might disappear. Are you hurt? Did they hurt you? I'm okay, Mama, Sarah assured her, her small arms wrapped tightly around her mother's neck. The nice man took care of me. Rebecca looked up at Miles over her daughter's head, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Miles nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude, but moved by the reunion. We need to move, he said gently. Porter's men are still searching. Rebecca composed herself with visible effort, wiping away tears. Yes, of course. She examined Miles more closely, noticing his blood-soaked shirt. You're wounded. It'll keep, he said dismissively. What happened? Where's the other horse? Rebecca's expression darkened. Porter's men. I managed to create a diversion, but they pursued me. I lost them in the hills, but my horse went lame. Had to leave it. She glanced around. Where's Eagle Eye? Stayed behind to cover our escape, Miles said grimly. Said he'd meet us at the rendezvous. Rebecca's face fell. Do you think he— I don't know, Miles admitted. But we can't wait here to find out. With only one horse, we'll have to double up. Head for Holloway's place in town. It's our best chance. Rebecca nodded, then looked down at Sarah. Sweetheart, where's Penny? Where's your doll? Sarah's face grew solemn. I gave her to the man with the nice face. For luck. Rebecca and Miles exchanged a significant look. The map piece hidden in the doll was now with Eagle Eye if he still lived. That was very generous, Rebecca told her daughter. I'm sure she's helping him. They mounted up Rebecca in the saddle with Sarah before her Miles behind. The horse protested the weight of 3 riders, but seemed strong enough to manage at a walking pace. They set off toward Tombstone as twilight deepened into night, taking a circuitous route to avoid Porter's searching men. Miles found himself fighting to stay conscious, the pain in his shoulder, now a constant burning presence. The blood loss and exertion had taken their toll. Rebecca seemed to sense his struggle, occasionally reaching back to steady him when he swayed. Not much farther, she murmured encouragingly. They reached the outskirts of Tombstone well after midnight, the town mostly dark and quiet. Only the saloons still showed lights, muted piano music, and occasional bursts of laughter drifting through the night air. Holloway's house stood on a quiet street lined with cottonwood trees, a substantial 2-story home befitting a successful banker. They approached from the rear using alleys and back streets to avoid notice. In the small stable behind the house, they dismounted. Miles nearly collapsed as his feet hit the ground, saved from falling only by Rebecca's quick support. You need a doctor, she said worriedly, noting his pallor even in the dim light. No doctors, Miles insisted. Too many questions, just need rest. Rebecca looked unconvinced but didn't argue. Wait here with Sarah, I'll see if Holloway will help us. She approached the back door of the house and knocked softly. After a moment, a light appeared in a downstairs window. The door opened cautiously, revealing James Holloway in a dressing gown, a small derringer in his hand. Brief conversation ensued, too quiet for Miles to hear. Holloway glanced in his direction, nodded, then disappeared back inside. Rebecca returned to the stable. He'll help, she reported. There's a guest room at the back of the house where we can stay. He's sending his housekeeper to prepare it. Miles nodded weakly. Good. But we can't stay long. Porter has connections in town. Eventually someone will talk. First, we need to tend that wound, Rebecca said firmly. You're no good to anyone if you die of infection. Miles couldn't argue with that logic. He allowed Rebecca and Holloway to help him into the house through a back entrance and up a narrow servant's staircase to a secluded room on the second floor. Sarah followed silently, her eyes wide as she took in the elegant surroundings. The room was simply but comfortably furnished with a large bed, washstand, and sitting area. Holloway's housekeeper, an older woman with a kind face and no-nonsense manner, had already prepared hot water, clean bandages, and a tray of medical supplies. My late wife was a nurse during the war, Holloway explained. I kept her things. He surveyed Miles with concern. That needs proper treatment. I can send for Dr. Williams, he's discreet. No, Miles said firmly, easing himself onto the edge of the bed. Too risky. I can manage, Rebecca interjected. My father was a doctor. I assisted him often. Holloway nodded. I'll leave you to it then. There are clean clothes in the wardrobe. Food will be brought up shortly. He turned to Sarah, his stern banker's face softening. Would you like some hot chocolate, young lady? My housekeeper makes the best in the territory. Sarah looked to her mother for permission, then nodded shyly. Come along then, Holloway said kindly. Let's let your mother work. When they had gone, Rebecca turned to Miles, her expression resolute. Shirt off. Let me see how bad it is. Miles complied with difficulty, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through his shoulder. The wound was ugly. The bullet had passed clean through, but the edges were red and inflamed, seeping blood and fluid. Rebecca worked methodically, cleaning the wound front and back with carbolic solution, probing gently to ensure no fabric remained inside. Miles endured in silence, though sweat beaded on his forehead from the pain. You're lucky, Rebecca said as she began bandaging. Another inch to the right, and the bullet would have hit bone. As it is, you'll have a new scar to add to your collection. Miles glanced down at his torso, marked with the evidence of past battles, a knife wound here, a bullet grazed there. What's one more, he said wryly. Rebecca's fingers paused on a particularly vicious scar that ran across his ribs. Apache, Comanche, Miles corrected. 1868. Scouting mission in Texas. Her hands resumed their work, gentle yet efficient. You've lived quite a life. Not always one to be proud of, Miles admitted the pain and exhaustion, lowering his usual defenses. Rebecca secured the bandage, then helped him into a clean shirt from Holloway's wardrobe. You saved my daughter today, she said softly. Whatever you did before, that's something to be proud of. Before Miles could respond, a knock at the door announced the return of Sarah with Holloway's housekeeper, who carried a tray of food, bread, cheese, cold meat, and a pot of coffee. Eat, the woman instructed, setting down the tray. Then rest. The little one will sleep in my room tonight. Sarah looked uncertainly at her mother. Can't I stay with you, Mama? Rebecca knelt to her daughter's level. Tonight you'll have a special adventure with Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper supplied. Mrs. Peterson, Rebecca continued, I need to look after Mr. Sullivan and his hurt shoulder. We'll be together in the morning. Sarah considered this, then nodded solemnly. Okay, but you promise to be here when I wake up. I promise, Rebecca said, embracing her daughter tightly. I'm never leaving you again. After Sarah had gone with Mrs. Peterson, Rebecca and Miles ate in silence, both too exhausted for conversation. The food revived Miles somewhat, but the ordeal of the day soon caught up with him. He found himself struggling to keep his eyes open. Rebecca noticed his fatigue. Sleep, she said, clearing away the remnants of their meal. I'll keep watch. Wake me in a few hours, Miles insisted. You need rest too. Rebecca nodded, though whether in agreement or merely to placate him wasn't clear. Miles lay back on the bed, intending only to rest his eyes for a moment. He was asleep almost instantly. Miles dreamed of fire, villages burning along Sherman's March, a farmhouse in flames, his wife and son trapped inside while he was hundreds of miles away. Porter's estate going up in smoke, eagle eye silhouetted against the blaze. He woke with a start, disoriented, reaching instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there. Easy, a soft voice said from nearby. You're safe. Rebecca sat in a chair by the window, a shawl around her shoulders, the first gray light of dawn illuminating her face. She looked tired but alert, a small revolver resting in her lap. Holloway's contribution to their safety, Miles guessed. You were supposed to wake me, he said, noting that he'd slept through the night. You needed the rest more than I needed sleep, she replied simply. Miles sat up, carefully testing his shoulder. The pain had subsided to a dull throb, and the fever that had been building seemed to have broken. Rebecca's care had been effective. Any sign of eagle eye, he asked. Rebecca shook her head. Nothing. Holloway sent a man to watch the roads into town. No Apache matching his description has been seen. Miles absorbed this grimly. The odds of eagle eye surviving against Porter's men had been slim at best. And the map piece, the one in Sarah's doll, gone with him, Rebecca confirmed, but Holloway has his piece secure in the bank, and we still have the fragment Eagle Eye was carrying. Her expression grew troubled. If he's been captured rather than killed, Porter could have two pieces now. Miles finished the thought, and no, we're after the third. Rebecca nodded. Holloway thinks Porter will move quickly. The government man who arrived yesterday is a land commissioner here specifically about the Apache claims. If Porter finds the documents first, he'll destroy them and the Apache lose their land forever, Miles concluded. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, fighting a wave of dizziness. We need to get to that third piece before Porter does. You're in no condition to... A knock at the door interrupted her. Holloway entered without waiting for a response, his face grave. Porter's men are in town, he announced without preamble. 6 of them asking questions showing your descriptions. They've been to the sheriff already. Miles stood, ignoring his body's protests. We need to leave. Not through the streets, Holloway cautioned. They're watching the roads. But there's another way. He crossed to the window, pointing to a neighboring rooftop. The buildings connect. You can make your way to the livery stable 3 blocks over. I've arranged for horses to be waiting. Sarah, Rebecca asked immediately. My housekeeper is preparing her. She'll meet you at the stable. Holloway handed a small bundle to Miles. Clothes, food, ammunition, and this. He produced a folded paper, his piece of the map. Take it. I've memorized it, and it's safer with you than in the bank, which Porter could access with a court order. Miles accepted the map with a nod of thanks. What about you? Porter will suspect you helped us. Holloway gave a thin smile. I'm not without influence in this town, and at my age there's little left to fear. He straightened his shoulders, the soldier visible beneath the banker's exterior. Now go. Quickly. They followed Holloway's directions, climbing out the window onto a sloped roof, then making their way across connected buildings toward the livery stable. Miles moved more slowly than he would have liked, his wounded shoulder limiting his agility, but Rebecca stayed close, offering support when needed. They reached the stable without incident, finding Mrs. Peterson waiting with Sarah, who was dressed in boy's clothing for disguise. 2 horses stood saddled and ready, along with a small pack mule loaded with supplies. Holloway thinks of everything, Miles observed. A good banker plans for contingencies, Mrs. Peterson replied, handing Sarah up to Rebecca. Now hurry, my husband is creating a distraction on Allen Street to draw away Porter's men. As if on cue, shouting erupted from the direction of the main street, followed by the sound of breaking glass. That's our signal, Miles said, mounting his horse with effort. Which way? South, Rebecca decided, away from Porter's estate. We can circle back to the area shown on the map once we're clear. They rode out the back of the stable into a narrow alley, then through a series of back streets until they reached the southern edge of town. The commotion on Allen Street had indeed drawn attention away from the outskirts, allowing them to slip away unnoticed. Once beyond the town limits, they increased their pace, putting distance between themselves and Tombstone as quickly as the horses could manage. The sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day in the desert. Miles studied Holloway's map piece as they rode, comparing it to the fragment Eagle Eye had carried. Together with Rebecca's recollection of the piece hidden in Sarah's doll, a clearer picture emerged. The location is in the Dragoon Mountains, he determined, a cave system near a formation called Cochise's Stronghold. Rebecca nodded. Thomas and I explored those mountains before Sarah was born. The Apache consider them sacred ground. It makes sense they'd hide their most important documents there, Miles agreed, but it's rough country, easy to get lost if you don't know exactly where you're going. Which is why the map is in 3 pieces, Rebecca said. No one person could find it alone. They rode through the morning and into the afternoon, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and allow Sarah to stretch her legs. The child had been remarkably resilient, asking few questions and enduring the hard journey without complaint. As they prepared to resume riding after one such stop, Sarah suddenly pointed to the horizon behind them. "Riders," she said simply. Miles and Rebecca turned to look. Sure enough, a dust cloud approached from the direction of Tombstone, multiple riders moving fast. "Porter's men," Miles said grimly. "They've picked up our trail." Rebecca lifted Sarah back onto her horse. "How far to the mountains?" "Too far to outrun them," Miles assessed. "We need to find a defensible position." He scanned the terrain ahead. The land was mostly flat with sparse vegetation offering little cover. But to the east, a cluster of large boulders rose from the desert floor, not ideal but better than nothing. "There," he pointed. "We'll make our stand at those rocks." They rode hard for the boulder formation, reaching it just as their pursuers came clearly into view, 8 riders heavily armed with Porter himself at their head. The judge was unmistakable, even at a distance, his tall frame and black clothing standing out among his men. The boulders formed a rough circle, perhaps 30 feet in diameter with gaps between them, offering both cover and firing positions. Miles helped Rebecca and Sarah dismount, sending the horses into the center of the formation, where they would be protected from gunfire. "Stay low," he instructed Rebecca, handing her Holloway's revolver to supplement her own weapon. "Use the lower firing positions. I'll take the high ground." Rebecca nodded, her face set with determination. She guided Sarah to a protected alcove formed by 2 leaning boulders. "Stay here no matter what happens," she told her daughter firmly. "Don't come out until I call you." Sarah's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded bravely. "I will, Mama." Miles climbed to the top of the largest boulder, ignoring the pain in his shoulder to gain a better view of the approaching riders. They had slowed now, spreading out to surround the rock formation. Porter raised his hand, halting his men just beyond comfortable rifle range. He urged his horse forward a few paces, calling out in a voice that carried clearly across the desert. "Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Sullivan, there's no need for bloodshed. I only want what's mine." "Nothing here belongs to you, Porter," Miles shouted back. "The map pieces do," Porter replied. "And the girl, she's a material witness in a criminal case." Rebecca had joined Miles on the boulder. "You're the criminal," she called, her voice shaking with fury. "You murdered my husband, branded me like an animal." Porter seemed unperturbed by her accusations. "I did what was necessary, just as I'm doing now." He gestured to his men. "I have 8 armed deputies with me. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender the map pieces and I'll let you live." "He's lying," Miles said quietly to Rebecca. "He can't let us live. We know too much." Rebecca nodded, her face grim. "I know." She checked her weapons methodically. "How long can we hold them off?" Miles assessed their situation honestly. "Not long, maybe an hour if we're careful with ammunition. Less if they rush us from multiple directions." "Is that enough time for help to arrive?" "What help?" Miles asked, surprised. "I sent a message with Mrs. Peterson," Rebecca explained, "to Lieutenant Hayes at Fort Huachuca, Thomas's cousin, telling him about Porter, the documents, everything." Miles felt a flicker of hope. Thomas Morgan's connections might yet save them if help could arrive in time. Porter's voice carried to them again. "I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you 5 minutes to decide. After that, we come in shooting." Miles and Rebecca exchanged a glance wordlessly, agreeing on their course of action. "We need to buy time," Miles said. "Keep them talking as long as possible." Rebecca nodded, then turned to face Porter. "We want assurances," she called. "How do we know you'll keep your word?" "You don't," Porter replied bluntly, "but it's your only chance. The alternative is certain death." As the negotiation continued, Miles slipped back down from the boulder, checking their perimeter for weaknesses. The formation was defensible, but far from impregnable. If Porter's men coordinated their attack, they could breach the circle from multiple points. Miles returned to Rebecca's side. "If they come," he said quietly, "I'll hold them as long as I can. You take Sarah and the horses, break out the back when the shooting starts. Head for the mountains." Rebecca shook her head firmly. "We're not separating, not again." "Rebecca." "No." Her voice was steel. "My husband died alone. I won't let that happen to you. We stand together." Before Miles could respond, Porter's voice rang out again. "Time's up. What's your answer?" Miles stood, presenting himself as a target to draw attention from Rebecca. "You want the map pieces, Porter? Come and get them." Porter's face darkened with anger. He raised his arm, about to signal his men to attack, when a new sound interrupted the standoff. A single rifle shot coming not from the boulder formation, but from the desert to the west. One of Porter's men jerked in his saddle, then toppled to the ground. The others wheeled in confusion, searching for this new threat. Another shot rang out, another man fell. Precise, deadly shooting from an unseen marksman. "Scatter," Porter ordered his remaining men. "Find the shooter." But before they could comply, a war cry split the air, a high, ululating sound that raised the hair on the back of Miles's neck. He knew that cry, had heard it before in battle. Eagle Eye, he breathed, scarcely believing it. From behind a distant ridge, a lone rider appeared, charging directly toward Porter's men. The Apache warrior rode low over his horse's neck, the Remington rifle in one hand, firing with impossible accuracy. Porter's men broke formation, some returning fire, others simply fleeing. Porter himself remained frozen for a moment, seeming unable to comprehend this turn of events. Miles seized the opportunity, raising his rifle and taking careful aim at Porter. But before he could fire, more riders appeared on the horizon, a dozen mounted men in the blue uniforms of the U.S. Cavalry, led by a young officer who could only be Lieutenant Hayes. "Army's here," Miles shouted to Rebecca. "We made it." Porter, seeing the approaching soldiers, finally spurred his horse into motion, fleeing toward the east. Two of his remaining men followed while the others threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. Eagle Eye, still charging, adjusted his course to pursue Porter. Miles made a split-second decision. "Stay with Sarah," he told Rebecca. "I'm going after them." Before she could protest, he was sliding down the boulder, running for his horse. The pain in his shoulder was forgotten, replaced by a burning determination to finish this. Porter couldn't be allowed to escape, not after all he'd done. Miles mounted and spurred his horse after Eagle Eye, who was now a distant figure pursuing Porter and his two companions. The cavalry, seeing this new development, split their forces, some stopping to secure the surrendering deputies, others continuing the chase. Miles rode hard, pushing his mount to its limits. The desert flew by in a blur of dust and heat. Ahead, he could see Eagle Eye gaining on Porter, the gap between them closing. One of Porter's men turned in his saddle, firing wildly. Eagle Eye swayed but kept riding. Porter and his men were heading for a narrow canyon, a potential escape route if they reached it first. Miles angled his course to intercept them, cutting across rough terrain in a desperate gamble. His horse stumbled on the uneven ground but recovered. Miles was close enough now to see Porter's face contorted with rage and fear. The judge turned, saw Miles approaching from the side, and raised a pistol. The shot went wide. Miles returned fire, his bullet striking Porter's horse. The animal screamed and fell, throwing its rider heavily to the ground. Porter's two companions rode on without stopping, disappearing into the canyon entrance. Miles reined in near the fallen judge, dismounting with his rifle trained on Porter. Eagle Eye arrived moments later, blood streaming from a wound in his side, but his eyes clear and focused. Porter struggled to his feet, his fine black suit covered in dust, his face bleeding from the fall. But his eyes showed no defeat, only a cold, calculating hatred. "You've ruined everything," he spat. "Years of planning destroyed by a washed-up scout and an Apache savage." "It's over, Porter," Miles said. "The cavalry's coming. You'll stand trial for murder, kidnapping, corruption." Porter laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think a judge fears trials? I have friends in the territorial government, in Washington itself, men who understand what's at stake here." "The Apache land," Eagle Eye said. "The gold." "Not just gold," Porter sneered. "Power, control of water rights across the territory. Millions in mining concessions. Did you think this was about a few bags of Union gold?" "It doesn't matter what it was about," Miles said. "You lost." Porter's hand moved suddenly, drawing a derringer from his sleeve. Miles fired instinctively, his bullet striking Porter in the chest. The judge staggered but remained standing, his own weapon now aimed at Miles. Before he could fire a second shot, rang out Eagle Eye's Remington. Porter jerked backward, a look of genuine surprise crossing his face before he collapsed to the ground. Miles approached cautiously, but it was unnecessary. Porter was dead, his eyes staring sightlessly at the Arizona sky. Eagle Eye dismounted, slowly pressing his hand to his wounded side. From his belt, he withdrew Sarah's doll, Penny miraculously intact despite everything. "The child will want this returned," he said simply. Miles stared at the Apache, taking in his bloodied appearance. "How did you escape the estate?" "The Mexican woman helped, showed me tunnels beneath the house used by servants." Eagle Eye's face remained impassive, but his eyes held a hint of amusement. Porter did not think servants worth noticing. His mistake. "You followed us to town," Eagle Eye nodded. "Watched from distance. Saw Porter's men searching. Followed when you fled." He gestured to the approaching cavalry. "Found them on the road." The young officer knew Rebecca's husband. The cavalry unit reached them, Lieutenant Hayes at their head. The young officer took in the scene, Porter's body, Miles, and Eagle Eye standing over him. "Mrs. Morgan said you might need assistance," Hayes said dryly. "Appears she was right." Miles nodded toward Porter. He resisted arrest. Hayes dismounted, examining the body briefly. "So I see. The territory will be better for his absence." He straightened, facing Miles and Eagle Eye. "The document, as you mentioned, the Apache land treaties. Where are they?" "Safe," Eagle Eye said. "Beyond the reach of men like Porter." Hayes considered this, then nodded. "Good. They should remain so until they can be properly authenticated by the Land Commission." He glanced at Porter again. "This man had powerful friends. They'll want explanations." "Tell them he died pursuing dangerous fugitives," Miles suggested. "It's true enough." Hayes smiled faintly. "Indeed. And the gold?" "What gold?" Miles asked innocently. The lieutenant laughed. "I see. He gestured to his men. Secure the body. We'll return to the boulder formation for Mrs. Morgan and her daughter. Weston, the soldiers carried out their orders. Miles turned to Eagle Eye, who was leaning more heavily against his horse, his wound clearly paining him. You need a doctor, Miles observed. Later, Eagle Eye said dismissively. First, we must secure what was hidden. With Porter dead, others will come looking. The cave and the dragoons, Miles agreed. We have 2 map pieces now, yours and Holloway's. Is it enough? Eagle Eye nodded. For one who knows the mountains as I do, yes. Miles studied his unlikely ally, a man whose people he had once helped persecute, now a comrade bound by shared purpose and survival. Why did you come back? He asked. You could have taken the map pieces and gone directly to the cave. Secured the documents and gold for your people. Eagle Eye was silent for a moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he said simply, a warrior does not abandon his brothers in battle. You fought for the child, for the woman. That made you my brother. The simple declaration touched Miles deeply. In the midst of bloodshed and betrayal, this man had found something worth honoring, not gold or documents or land, but loyalty itself. The child saved my life, Eagle Eye added, patting the doll secured at his belt. Her gift brought luck, as she said it would. Miles smiled, thinking of Sarah's solemn face as she'd handed over her precious doll. She'll be glad to know that. They mounted up, rejoining the cavalry for the ride back to the boulder formation. As they approached, Miles saw Rebecca standing tall among the rocks, Sarah beside her, both watching anxiously for their return. When she spotted Miles and Eagle Eye riding alongside the soldiers, Rebecca's face transformed with relief. She lifted Sarah into her arms and descended to meet them. You're alive, she breathed as Miles dismounted. Both of you. Porter isn't, Miles informed her. It's over. Rebecca absorbed this, her expression a complex mixture of relief, vindication, and lingering sadness. Thomas can rest now, she said softly. Eagle Eye dismounted carefully, his wound finally taking its toll. He approached Sarah, who watched him with wide, curious eyes. I brought someone back to you, he said, unhooking Penny from his belt and presenting the doll with formal dignity. Sarah accepted the doll reverently. Did she help you be brave? Very brave, Eagle Eye confirmed seriously. She saved my life. Sarah beamed, clutching Penny to her chest. I knew she would. Lieutenant Hayes approached, removing his hat respectfully. Mrs. Morgan, I'm Thomas's cousin, James Hayes. I received your message. I'm sorry I couldn't arrive sooner. You came when it mattered most, Rebecca assured him. Thank you. Hayes nodded. We should move out soon. Porter's remaining men may regroup. I'd like to get you safely to the fort before nightfall. Miles exchanged a glance with Eagle Eye. We have something to take care of first. The documents Porter was seeking. Hayes understood immediately. The Apache land treaties. Yes, they should be secured before news of Porter's death spreads. He considered for a moment. Take 2 of my men as escort. The rest of us will bring Mrs. Morgan and her daughter to Fort Huachuca. Rebecca shook her head. We stay together. All of us. Hayes began to protest, but Miles raised a hand. She's right. We've come this far together. We'll finish it the same way. The young lieutenant looked from Miles to Rebecca to Eagle Eye, recognizing the bond that had formed between these unlikely allies. Very well, but we move quickly. Those mountains are no place to be caught after dark. They set out within the hour, a strange procession, cavalry soldiers, a school teacher and her daughter, a former scout, and an Apache warrior. Their destination, a hidden cave in the Dragoon Mountains, where secrets had lain buried since the Civil War. The journey was arduous, especially for Eagle Eye, whose wound had been hastily bandaged but required proper treatment. Yet he rode without complaint, his face betraying no pain as he guided them along ancient Apache trails into the mountains. As the sun began to set, they reached a distinctive rock formation, a natural arch spanning 2 towering pillars of stone. Eagle Eye pointed to a narrow cleft at the base of the western pillar. There, he said, the entrance. Miles dismounted, helping Rebecca and Sarah down from their horse. Lieutenant Hayes ordered his men to establish a perimeter, keeping watch for any pursuit. Holloway's map shows a specific route through the cave system, Miles said, withdrawing the banker's map piece. Without it, we could wander for days. Eagle Eye nodded, producing his own fragment. Together, the pieces revealed a path through what appeared to be a complex network of underground chambers. I will lead, Eagle Eye said. I have been here before, as a boy with my father. They lit torches from supplies provided by Hayes, then entered the narrow cleft. The passage widened almost immediately into a tall cavern, the walls adorned with ancient pictographs, Apache symbols, telling stories that predated European arrival. Eagle Eye moved confidently through the space, following the map and his own memories. The others followed closely, Sarah clinging to her mother's hand, her eyes wide with wonder at the underground world. They passed through chamber after chamber, some vast enough to house a small village, others so narrow they had to proceed in single file. The air grew cooler, the sounds of their footsteps echoing strangely in the enclosed space. Finally, after nearly an hour of careful progress, they reached a small, perfectly circular chamber. A shaft of fading daylight pierced the darkness from a hole in the ceiling high above, illuminating a flat stone in the center of the room. Eagle Eye approached the stone reverently. This is the place. He ran his hands across the stone's surface, finding an almost invisible seam. With practiced movements, he pressed specific points around the perimeter. There was a soft click, and the top of the stone shifted slightly. Together, Miles and Eagle Eye slid the heavy stone lid aside, revealing a cavity beneath. Within lay several oilskin-wrapped packages and a small iron chest. Eagle Eye carefully lifted out the packages, unwrapping the first to reveal yellow documents, covered in precise handwriting, the land treaties signed by Apache leaders and Union Army officers legally establishing Apache ownership of vast tracts of territory. The proof, Eagle Eye said softly, rewrapping the documents carefully. My people's claim to their homeland. The iron chest, when opened, contained gold coins. Union double eagles worth $20 each. Not a vast fortune by Eastern standards, but significant in the Arizona territory. Payment for Apache assistance during the war, Eagle Eye explained, and for safe passage through their lands. Lieutenant Hayes examined one of the documents with professional interest. These appear genuine. The Land Commission will need to verify them, of course, but if authentic, they supersede any subsequent claims. They are authentic, Eagle Eye said with quiet certainty. My father was present when they were signed. His mark is here. He pointed to a symbol among the Apache signatures. Hayes nodded respectfully. Then justice may finally be done for your people. They carefully repacked the documents and gold, securing them for transport. As they prepared to leave the cave, Sarah suddenly spoke up. What about Penny? She asked, holding up her doll. Doesn't she get a reward for helping? The adults exchanged amused glances. Eagle Eye crouched to Sarah's level, his usual stoic expression softening. Penny's reward is returning to you, doll, he said seriously. But perhaps, he reached into the chest, selecting a single gold coin. With solemn ceremony, he presented it to Sarah. For her bravery. Sarah accepted the coin with equal solemnity, carefully tucking it into Penny's dress pocket. Thank you. As they emerged from the cave into the gathering dusk, Miles found himself standing slightly apart, watching the others prepare for the journey back to Fort Huachuca. Rebecca was helping Sarah onto their horse. Eagle Eye was conferring with Hayes about the safest route down the mountain, and the soldiers were forming up for departure. A strange feeling washed over Miles, a sense of completion, of purpose fulfilled. For years, he had hidden from the world, from his past, from human connection itself. Yet in the span of a few days, he had found himself drawn back into life's complexities, its dangers and sorrows. Yes, but also its bonds of loyalty and unexpected moments of grace. Rebecca approached, leaving Sarah chatting animatedly with a young soldier who had offered her a piece of hard candy. What will you do now? She asked quietly, coming to stand beside Miles. He considered the question. I don't know. My ranch is gone. Porter's dead, but his allies might still come looking for revenge. You could come with us, Rebecca suggested. Hayes has offered me a teaching position at the fort. Sarah would be safe there with the Army's protection. Miles looked at her, surprised by the invitation and by his own reaction to it, a quickening of pulse, a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. I'm not sure I'm fit for civilization, he said honestly. Rebecca smiled. Who said anything about civilization? It's a frontier fort. They need men who know the territory, who can teach soldiers to survive in this land. She hesitated, then added, men who remember what it means to fight for something worth fighting for. Miles glanced at Eagle Eye, who had mounted his horse and was waiting patiently. What about him, or for him? He returns to his people, Rebecca said, to bring them the documents that prove their rights. But he said to tell you that brothers are always welcome in his camp. The simple message touched Miles deeply. From enemies to reluctant allies to brothers, their journey had transformed them both. As the group prepared to depart, Miles made his decision. He wouldn't return to isolation, to a life half-lived in the shadow of past sins. Whatever the future held, danger, uncertainty, even the unfamiliar territory of human connection, he would face it directly as he had faced Porter and his men. He mounted his horse, taking his place beside Rebecca and Sarah. The little girl smiled up at him, her face alight with trust and affection that he had done nothing to earn, yet somehow had been granted anyway. Ready? Rebecca asked. Miles nodded, finding himself genuinely smiling for the first time in longer than he could remember. Ready. They rode down from the mountains as night fell across the desert, the stars emerging one by one above them, constant and unchanging, as Rebecca had said, no matter what happened on earth below. But for Miles Sullivan, the world had changed irrevocably. His soul, long dried and hardened like the desert itself, had found water again, had found life. As they descended into the valley, Eagle Eye raised his hand in farewell, turning his horse toward the Apache lands to the north. Miles returned the gesture, a promise between warriors who had found unexpected brotherhood. Behind them, the Dragoon Mountains stood dark against the star-filled sky, ancient guardians of secrets both kept and revealed. Before them lay Fort Huachuca, its lights a distant constellation of human presence in the wilderness. And between past and future rode Miles Sullivan, no longer a man hiding from his ghost, but one who had made peace with them at last. Not through forgetting, but through finding a new purpose, worthy of remembrance. The desert, which had for so long been his refuge from life, had become the place where he found it again. Desert souls no longer lost riding toward home.